Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. At BriteVibe, we believe everyone deserves to be happy. But in today's world, everywhere you turn, there is division and negativity. At BriteVibe, we have created a global movement to bring 8 million people together who are inspired to live bright, live bold, and share bright vibes. Alone, it can be hard to change, but together we can change the world. Welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. Well, Gregg Vanourek, welcome to the BriteVibe podcast. How are you today, my friend?
I'm good, Matt. Really looking forward to our conversation. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, we're both living in the Midwest. We're Midwesterners right now, right? You're in Denver. I'm in Wichita. How long you been in Denver? I think that's I won't say super recent, but a more recent move, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 3 years this time. So we moved back right before the pandemic hit.
Oh, gotcha.
But we had lived here for 6 years before that. And then in between was 10 years in Sweden in Europe.
I had on a guest. Who did I have on? I had on a guest last week. Oh, it hasn't been released yet, but I had on a guest from Sweden last week, a very lovely lady, and actually one of Oprah's 100. Oh gosh, I wish I could. I'll think of her name. Very, very interesting conversation. We had a great conversation, which randomly she was from Sweden. So I've been in contact with 2 people from Sweden. Something's going on.
Sweden's taking over the world or something.
Apparently. So you've been in the leadership space a long time. You've written books. One of your latest books is called Life Entrepreneurs, but you do consulting, you do classes, right? You do obviously public speaking. So all things leadership, all things business. But I really like the angle that you take in your work where it's more encompassing. So kind of like entrepreneurship in your life, not just as a business, right? How you applying these same principles. And I think you're working on some new stuff. So let's jump in and get this conversation rolling. So Life Entrepreneurship, why don't you give us just a synopsis of what that book is?
Sure. So the book Life Entrepreneurs, Ordinary People Creating Extraordinary Lives.
Right.
I co-wrote it with my friend and former colleague, Christopher Gergen, who's a longtime social entrepreneur and a great guy. And we tend to think about entrepreneur as a business entrepreneur who starts a business and runs it. And of course, there are variations like an intrapreneur who's inside a big company, a social entrepreneur who brings the principles and practices of entrepreneurship to social problems like poverty or disease or trafficking. And we broaden it even further to your point. Why not be the entrepreneur of your life?
Right.
And so essentially what we mean by that is integrate your life and work with your purpose and passion and intentionally craft your life and work in alignment with your values, your strengths, and your passions. And so we went around and we interviewed 55 people around the world. Some of them are famous business and social entrepreneurs, some of them you've never heard of. And it was really an amazing variety, Matt. It was a rancher, a fighter pilot, a civil rights advocate, a minister, yoga maven, all sorts of things. And we asked them stories about their life and sort of how they connected the dots and how they've sort of designed the life that they want, including their, in many cases, ventures that they built, but also their family life or their hobbies or their travel, their education, their spirituality. And so it was really inspiring and humbling to get sort of a view into the flow of people's lives.
I bet. I love that as well. I've been I guess just a human nature student in general. Just I love talking to people that are doing, and again, to your point, social entrepreneurs, business entrepreneurs, but just people who are passionate about what they do. It's so contagious. And I'm always just so curious why they do the things they do. And then just always amazed at wow, I didn't even know that was a thing, what they're doing for a living or what they built. Or I'm like, wow, I had never even thought. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about that they have they're a manufacturer and they're providing some equipment to another manufacturer. And they said, yeah, they're in a business that manufactures equipment that takes shells off of nuts, like peanuts and walnuts. I'm just like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Right? I'm just like, I never even thought that would have been, so it's always amazing to me what people come up with and the ways that they creatively create businesses and jobs and all this other stuff. So as you interviewed these 55 people, one, what was the qualification? I mean, what was yes, they checked these boxes to be in the book? What was that?
Yeah. So we had a filter of that they were entrepreneurial in some fashion, including this new definition that we kind of coined this term, life entrepreneur. So we had some sense that they were doing interesting things in the world, but they were also very thoughtful about how they were entrepreneuring their lives as well. And that's something that's a little hard to know from the outside. And so you have to kind of dig into stories and whatnot. And, some stories rose more to the surface, a real variety of people as well. We wanted a diversity of different backgrounds, different outlooks and experiences, different industries and sectors. And and so we had thousands of pages of transcripts from these interviews that we did, because these were very deep interviews about their life and work. And we, kind of went through and extracted themes and patterns. And then we ended up, writing the book and then creating workshops and programs around how do you become the entrepreneur of your life.
Interesting. And so that was going to be my next question, is kind of what were some of these themes? What were some of the things that you noticed across the 50? I mean, was there like one or two things that were across all 55 that you were just like, that you would have not necessarily known going into your project?
I mean, some of the main themes were, courage is a big theme to do something, a little bit unconventional. So, instead of following the herd and doing what's expected of you or what other people typically would do, a life entrepreneur will kind of blaze their own path. And that will often have a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenge. And so the courage to try, to just have some sense that some kind of passion, some kind of motivation, some kind of burning emotion that pulls you towards something. I want more. I don't want to settle. Yeah. And then you have to do it authentically. So another theme is what we call authentic integrity. So you can think about authenticity. It's not living someone else's life. It's not doing what others expect, but it's also having integrity, where integrity is not only doing the right thing, but it comes from the word integer, which is one or whole. And so it's not compartmentalizing and sort of leading a different life or being a different person. It's trying to integrate your life and work and family and spirituality and all the different things so that you're the same person. And so there's vulnerability in there as well. And then another big theme I would say is pervasive service. Being the entrepreneur of your life is not about just you and what you want and and how you look to other people. For it to be purposeful, there has to be some sense of contributing to others. So we defined pervasive service as an ethic of contribution, as a defining feature of our lives. And so kind of every day, in ways big and small, are we adding value to our family, to our colleagues, to our community, to a cause, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be huge. I mean, obviously it can be, and some of these people are working on some big social problems, but it can be being kind to people. It could be opening the door for people. It could be just listening, being a good friend, being present with your family and not on your phone. And just all those little micro exchanges, they add up to something significant over time.
What was the biggest shock, I guess, from those 55 interviews? What was the biggest kind of like, I would have never guessed that?
Yeah. So I think one of the big surprises was that a lot of what we would view as big successes, where people, some of these are famous entrepreneurs behind Starbucks or Chipotle and other big ventures like that. A lot of it is the serendipity and the lack of a clear plan at the outset, right? It pretty rare where people said, oh, I definitely want this. I'm going to do step A, B, C, and it's going to get me there. And so it wasn't linear. In many cases, it was chaotic, and even some really big surprises emerged. So one example would be Steve Ells is the founder of Chipotle.
I was going to say, I know that name. Yeah, I know the name. Oh, yeah.
So it's the fast casual burrito chain.
Chipotle, but yeah, I read about him a while back when it first was like on the market or new to the market. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're a pioneer in the industry. They
Uh-huh.
grew very rapidly. I mean, if you come to Colorado, they're all over the
Yep.
place. They were acquired by McDonald's, but Steve wanted to be a gourmet chef, and
Hmm.
so his plan was, and he went to school and he studied, and he started a burrito chain just as kind of a cash cow
Hmm.
to fund his real dream of becoming, a gourmet chef.
Right.
And he saw a wildly popular fast casual thing going on. He said, "Oh, I can do that." And then he kind of fell in love with the opportunity to change the way we think about our supply chains and healthy food and
Hmm.
natural and
Hmm.
organic thing.
Yep.
And the more he learned about the industry, and he saw how, and it really kind of caught his values and his
Mhm.
convictions of like, this is really disgusting. There's
Right.
got to be a better way. And it just turned out to be something totally different than what he planned, but he
Hmm.
was still Steve with his purpose and values the whole way. And he just
Hmm.
manifested in something very surprising.
That is fun. Yeah, that story that it actually sold to McDonald's, was that, did you talk to him before or after that had happened?
We talked to him before
Oh,
that
before
happened.
that happened. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious what that transition was for him post that sale. And do you have another example of something that you were just so chaotic? It was, most of these successes were more unplanned that they seemed on the outside, because obviously I love the overnight success that took 20 years to happen, right? It's the kind of like the Elon Musk type thing where it's like he's an instant overnight success. He's like, no, 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 he's been doing this like for a long time, right? And it just looks like he's successful now because we didn't read in the paper how he almost went belly up and had to sell to Apple type thing, right? I mean, or called Apple and they
Yeah.
didn't return his call, right? Stuff
Yeah.
like that. You're
Right.
like, those are the sleepless night type thing. So yeah, do you have another example or two of things that you came across that were that would just be like, huh, I would have never guessed?
I do. So one of the other themes that showed up in the book from our research was how many people, a significant part of their story was a big stumbling block in their life, some trap that they had fallen into or some pitfall. And,
Uh-huh.
and often it was things like trying to live up to some ideal from their
Uh-huh.
parents
Uh-huh.
or the expectations of their peers. So Kimberly Wilson is a great example. So small town girl, rural
Hmm.
community. She just wanted to get out of there because she
Right.
didn't see a lot of opportunity. So she
Hmm.
moved to the big city on the East Coast and was a paralegal working for big law firms and stuff, and wearing power suits and making a lot more money than her friends back home. And everybody's like, "Wow, Kimberly, you're doing really great. You got this really nice apartment in DC and everything." And but she was miserable after a while. I
Hmm.
mean, it's the long hours, and it
Hmm.
wasn't a good fit for her. And she realized, she went to a yoga retreat,
Hmm.
and it just spoke to her, just the whole combination of East and West and health
Right.
and wellness and inner peace and physical. And it just spoke to her. And she came back and realized that her work was killing her soul, as she put it. Right.
Right.
And so here she is, like, I'm on this path, I'm invested, like, oh, I can't change now. Everybody's looking to me. And so she was at this crossroads. And a similar story with Warren Brown, tall, handsome African American with dreadlocks, went to work for a big government agency
Hmm.
as an attorney. And first one in his family to go to college. And again, his friends are like, "Oh my God, Warren, you are killing it. This
Hmm.
is just incredible." And he actually went to a festival and
Hmm.
heard a live band playing a song by Radiohead,
Uh-huh.
song Karma Police. And one of the lyrics in the song was, "For a moment there, I lost myself. I
Hmm.
lost myself."
Right.
And all of a sudden, Warren just had he had this kind of inner voice
Uh-huh.
emerge out of the blue, a little strange for him, not
Right.
typical for
Yeah.
him. And it's kind of like, "Are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." You know, "Are you you?"
Mm.
The question came up for him was, "Are you you?"
Interesting.
And,
Yeah.
and the answer was no. He was
Right.
not living his own life. And
Hmm.
then another question that popped up after that, well, "Are you happy?" The answer was no.
No. Right.
And then, "Are you ready?" Are you ready to do something about it? And and ultimately, being an entrepreneur, whether you're a life entrepreneur or other kinds of entrepreneur, is about taking action. You can't
Right.
just sit there and navel gaze.
Yep.
So Warren ended up sort of experimenting. It turns out he loved to bake, and so he got
Hmm.
involved in the food industry. Was doing kind of some catering things, and all of a sudden, the energy shifted. And
Mhm.
people like, wow, cakes, happiness. I love cake. Cake is, about parties and celebrations. And he just got into a zone, and it turned into this whole set of like bakeries and a cable show and a cookbook and all sorts of stuff. And again, it was never planned. It was never like he had this master plan of I'm
Right,
going to
right.
switch over, but it just he would do something and we learn and adjust and open a new door and open a new door, and it just kept leading him to more interesting places where he felt more alive, where he
Mhm.
he came alive again, just
Mhm.
like Kimberly with her with going into yoga.
Mhm. And 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 so those are two great examples. Um, so, and I think that you've touched on something there that we've talked about on the show quite a bit, and I think is prevalent right now. I think there's a lot of people wanting to come alive. Um, with all of the, I mean, I think that you know, I never want to say the word COVID again, but it seems like it still comes up, right? But it seems like that pressure, that situation, not even a pressure cooker, but that whole situation brought to the surface this whole, the questions you just asked, am I happy? What am I, is this truly me? All of these things. I know it did for me, and I've been very transparent on the show. I'm still struggling with all of these questions that you just asked, but there is this almost like want to come alive, but how do you help people walk through that? I guess, what do you do with those people? Me being one of them. I'm in that herd, right? I'm in that group.
And me too. We're all a work in progress. We are all a
Yes,
work in
yes.
progress. But I think you're onto something. I mean, I think we're really in a big moment in time right now where collectively we're still trying to claw our way out of the pandemic, and it's
Mm-hmm.
still got all sorts of implications. But one of the things that it's done is it's called the question
Mm-hmm.
about the way we're living, and especially about the way we're working, and the
Mm-hmm.
power dynamics between the workplace and the worker and these kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things. And I think one of the problems and one of the traps that I've fallen into in my life is abdicating my life,
Mm-hmm.
turning over too much of my life to my work. And so, for example,
Mm-hmm.
after business school, I worked for a startup that ended up being a scale up. It was an online education company.
No,
And when
uh-huh.
I started at the very beginning, there were 6 of us around a table.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 years later, we had hundreds of employees, and we're doing like, I don't know, $65 million in sales on the way to IPO and
Mm-hmm.
everything. We became the market leader.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so, I mean, it was so difficult. The challenges. We almost ran out of cash a couple
which,
times.
which can I just, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to say that I have heard, for those of you who are at that space in your business or in business, that running out of cash thing's a real deal. When I had one of my first attorneys, we were given a presentation, and I was presenting, one of my other partners was presenting. This is 20 years ago, probably not 20, 15 years ago. And we were talking about something. And he goes, yeah, two things kill, the thing that can kill a business the quickest is success. I was like, why? He goes, because you run out of resources and you run out of cash. And I was just like, and at the time I was like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just an attorney. Right. Right. And then later I'm like, yeah, that's a real thing, right? When if your business is successful, especially like you're talking about, where it has a lot of success kind of in the beginning, you literally, because of the growth, can run out of cash, right? It's just, they're usually cash monsters if they have
Right.
rapid
Yeah.
growth, right? So I'm sorry,
That's right.
I wanted to make that point
Yeah.
because I didn't want to skate
Yeah.
over that, but that is a normal, typical thing for businesses to have that type of, and again, at the top of the show, I talked about Elon Musk. They ran out of cash, right?
Yeah.
That's why he was wanting to sell to Apple. That's part of his story, because they ran out of cash, right?
Yeah.
And here's
Yeah.
now it would look, it looks like would be crazy for him to think about selling to Apple. But at the time, highly successful business. They just hadn't scaled up enough to have the cash inflow to, right. They were still in scale mode. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I love where you're headed here.
Yeah. No, but you're absolutely right. Growing too quickly can be a source, cash is king. And
Right.
but I felt so responsible for my team and the company and the revenues that we were bringing in, and, just wanted to do a good job that, I was sacrificing my health and my relationships, and just sort of gave myself over too much to now, we had a big mission, and we had a strong purpose. We're going to add a lot of social impact. So there were reasons to work hard, but this notion of sort of giving over your life so much. And that's one of the big traps, as my work now is focusing on new project is on the traps of living. One of the most common traps of living for people who are, professionals and entrepreneurs and leaders is your identity is wrapped up too much in your work.
Right.
And so that when your work is going great, you feel on top of the world, like, oh, wow, look how smart I am, or look how successful I am. And if your work is not going well, or if your company fails or whatnot, look how awful, I'm just a terrible person. I'm an idiot.
Greg, I may be the only one listening to this podcast. This may just be for me. I'll be honest with you. I have been through that, right? That was my COVID experience. What you just described was going from hero to zero in a matter of months, right?
And I think this is really common. I think a lot of people go through that, and it's actually hard not to. It's like our brain tricks us to think.
Yep.
And so my question is, how can we be okay?
Right.
Even when, through the ups and the downs, and not get too, egotistical and narcissistic and arrogant, and not get too down on ourselves,
right,
and judgmental. And I mean, our inner voice can be brutal sometimes, right? Where we are just our own worst critics, and we are shooting ourselves in the foot with the way we talk to ourselves and our sort of inner dialogue. And so I had this experience, when we moved to Sweden, my wife and I moved over with our daughters 3 and 1, and we didn't have stuff set up. And, if you've ever lived abroad, typically it takes years to transition into the language, the culture, the work, the friendships. And I just had this experience of feeling miserable, like I didn't have it set up yet. And it was unrealistic. I mean, some people obviously get it set up right away, and other people it takes 5 years, it can take 3 months, whatever is a range. But typically it takes years. And I felt awful. I was like, oh my God, this is what's going on. And then we moved back, and it's like, and eventually you learn, like, no, I can be okay. It's just right now things don't happen to me, and so what am I going to do about it? And I've got agency, and I am responsible, but not sort of abdicating and falling into that trap of your identity being too caught up in that.
Right. Exactly. Which is hard to do, I think, right? Because, I'd say the human experience is about identity. We identify with, communities, groups, our environment. We identify, I mean, that's kind of how we gauge and value who we are as a human being is our associations to other things, right? If there was nothing there, I don't know exactly what we would be experiencing, but one, I think it's very much needed, this agency, self-authorship, whatever you want to call it. But it's hard to do. So how do you navigate that? I mean, kind of what are some of the things that you've noticed that help you navigate that?
And by the way, there are lots of related traps to that too, like caring too much about what other people think, and all sorts of things like that, conforming too much, comparing ourselves to others that get us into trouble. So, for me, what do you do about it? To me, I have this notion of kind of a safe harbor. We all, sometimes we're on a beautiful sailing expedition and the sun is shining, but we all also run into big storms, as the world did with COVID, or if you struggle, financially or professionally or relationally, whatever. That's part of the human experience. And so to me, there's a safe harbor, and it's a set of things. It's a handful of things. And so at the center of it is, what is my purpose? What gives me a deeper set of why? Why I'm here, my reason for being, right? But that, by the way, is probably the most difficult one for most people when it comes to leadership and personal development, because for a lot of reasons. deeply related to that are my core values, what I care about most, what I value the most, and my beliefs and principles for how I'm going to live and try to live and show up in the world. And then what's my vision of the good life? And by the way, that's one of the reasons I got into this whole thing is I took a college course on the good life.
The good life.
But what does success mean? What does it look like? And what would it feel like for me to be crafting the life that I want, right? And then what are my strengths? What am I good at? And then and that can be a combination of like my knowledge, my skills, my talents. And then what are my passions? What affects me with palpable emotion, where I just care viscerally about something, right? And so I take the combined things of purpose, values, vision, strengths, and passions, and then I got to bump up against the world and see what the world needs and what the world wants and how I can actualize, not sitting around thinking, what is my purpose, right? It's how am I going to do all this stuff, right? I want to be a doer. I want to be a good husband and father. I want to be a good colleague. I want to be a part of my community. I want to be a good friend and a part of the solution and not the problem to these kinds of things. And so how do I go figure out, a business model or a way to actualize that in the world such that I can make a living? Because, the world is tough, the economy, inflation, COVID, all these things hit. So we need to build resilience and strategy and be flexible. That was another theme of our book, Life Entrepreneurs, was adaptive persistence. We want to persist through the adversity, but we have to learn to be adaptive and responsive to what's working and what's not working.
Totally. Yeah, totally agree. I love that. And so do you have something like when you were just talking about the purpose and, your value, all those things, is that part of some work that you've put out there in the world, or is that, in the book specifically, I guess?
Well, it's in the book. And then I'm also a blogger. So I'm writing tons of blogs. So I've been writing a whole bunch of blogs lately about purpose and about values. And also I've developed tools for this, how to discover your purpose, how to discover your values, these kinds of things. And also a brand new tool is what I call the traps test. We were talking a minute ago about the common traps of living. And Matt, I'm really passionate about that because I think a lot of times in this space of personal development and leadership and entrepreneurship, we focus on what to do, and there's all these sort of strategies and techniques, many of which are very valuable to do. But I think one of the neglected aspects is the things that get us into trouble. And we all get into trouble, the things that inhibit our quality of life and our happiness, or if it's leadership, the things that derail us and inhibit our leadership effectiveness. And those will keep popping up again and again, like a broken record, unless we deal with them. And so this notion of and often they're subconscious. We're not aware that we're doing them. So unless we deal with those, it's going to just cause us grief and stress and anxiety and problems with our colleagues. So I developed a new traps test. And I've identified more than 60 common traps of living that we fall into. And I think it's important to bring them into our awareness so that we can do something about it.
And so give me some examples there. So that because I love real world, like stuff I can sink my teeth in. So give us maybe some examples of traps. And then because you said they are subconscious, how on earth do we navigate those? How do we deal with them? If they're subconscious, it sounds like we become aware, but then what's after that?
So a few, we've talked about some of them. We talked about comparing ourselves to others. We talked about our identity being wrapped up too much in our work. We talked about conforming. I think a few more that I would add that are common are drifting through life, where we can be kind of, even if we're kind of successful, we're kind of doing a lot, but we just kind of have our head down. It's like we're busy with family and, mortgage and kids or whatever it is. And it's like 10 years have gone by and it's like, have I been awake and steering towards something? A related one to that would be settling for just kind of postponing the things that we want to do, the things that, a lot of us have dreams. Most of us, I'd say all of us have dreams, different dreams of like about our personal life or our professional life. And a lot of those dreams are locked up somewhere in the deep recesses of our heart and our brain. And we've kind of, they're gathering dust and cobwebs. And, there's a lot of fear. And so a couple of the mega traps, I would say, relate to fear is
Right.
one of the traps underneath a lot of the other traps. What if I try and I'm not successful? What will people think of me? What will I think of myself? And then another mega trap would be the trap of kind of ego, of getting caught up so much in our own world and this neediness for attention or recognition or praise or admiration or what I want and what I need. And that's really a recipe for unhappiness, actually. We all want to be happy, but if it becomes all about me, people aren't gonna want to be around me. I need to be part of a family and a team and a community and engage. And that's another one of the traps, is kind of cocooning or disconnecting. And that's been one of the themes of the COVID. We're all having to relearn about how to re-engage with our in new ways with our work and with our social circles and our families. And it's just hard. It's kind of a new phase of life and trying to navigate that. It's not easy when you've been in the habit for a couple of years of kind of hunkering down.
And so then take any one of those and let's take it through some type of healthier version, I guess. Or you could take the last one, you could take any of those that you've identified as traps. What do you do with it past the trap? Because it's one thing to say, I'm cocooning, right? And it's another then to say, okay, then what is that? If I know I'm doing it, if I have awareness, it's one thing to have awareness, and it's another to actually, to your point, do anything about it. So what's the catalyst for change, I guess?
And I'd say that's a great question, but it's a hard one to answer because each trap has some unique aspects to kind of about it. But then they tend to also have some sort of some general things and commonality. So I'd say, and I'm writing about each trap and what you can do specifically about each trap. And that's kind of my next book that'll be coming out next year. But I think generally there's a few things that I would say. One would be, and I would say they're not all subconscious, but many of them are often below the level of our conscious awareness. We're so habituated to doing it, that we don't even reflect on it anymore. And then often other people will see it much more clearly. And that speaks to the importance of having really good open relationships of vulnerability, with our spouse or partner, with our close friends, and with a small group, and these kinds of things. But I think so awareness is starting with awareness, number one, right? We have to be aware of the trap. And that's why I developed a traps test. It's like, put it in your face and say, like,
it's right on your website. I did see it. I went there. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I did see the traps. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, we all fall into them. This is not something to be ashamed about. These are common. Like, most people will fall into like a dozen, and the second thing is to have an intention to say, an intention to make change. Right. And then you develop sort of an action plan, or what am I going to do about that trap? Right. And I think typically, the way I like to think about it is you have to bounce between two modes. It's be kind of action and reflection, right? And I think one of the mistakes that people make is they're in their head too much, and they're trying to just kind of think it through and cognitively solve it or whatnot. But we really need to change how we show up, over time, to get beyond the trap. We have to develop new habits of being. We have to kind of become the person who has overcome the trap, become a new person through our action. And so, like, we have to get beyond the thinking about it mode and writing, like, that's helpful too. So it's kind of warrior and sage, action and reflection. And it's an iterative process about learning, how to deal with it in ways that work for you. Right. So for each trap, there might be 30 different things that people could do. What are the 5 things that work for you? Because it fits with your personality and your strengths. But the other thing that I think is fundamental here is getting more clarity, right, about how we want to live, how we want to work, how we want to show up in the world. Right. Because because that's going to give you motivational fuel to overcome. There's a lot of sort of, it's like a heavy blanket on us, right? And so you can get stuck in these traps for a lifetime, for decades, for years. So part of it is developing the energy and the motivation to overcome it. And what is it on the horizon? What better vision that's going to pull you, that's going to cause you to make those tough changes and to kind of change your behaviors and ruffle some feathers? Because as you change, it's going to disrupt some people's perceptions of you. There's a risk to your relationship, right? Like if you're married or something, people are like, what's going on with Matt? What's going on with Greg?
Right.
And so you have to stay connected and in sync with those closest to you.
Very interesting. And when you say that, you talk those close to you, and I was literally on a podcast earlier, and we were talking about similar things, because I was like, what's the number one thing you think people need to do when they're starting a business, or when they're, a small business owner or entrepreneurial? What's the number one thing you think they should do? And the guest said they have to, get people around them that believe in, that believe in them and support them, so that they can make better decisions, but also feel that support. And they said, and too often, the people around them aren't supportive. So it actually has a negative or converse effect. So you've got to kind of pick your champions, I guess, so to speak. So in your own life, or in the lives of these, of the people in the book, what did they do to kind of shore that up, as far as having people around them to kind of be supportive and help them make good decisions?
I want to answer that. First, I'll just mention there's some really interesting research on it from Professor Herminia Ibarra from a business school in France, where she researched people going through a career change and what it takes to navigate a career change successfully. And one of the surprising things, I guess the two big findings that stuck out for me, one, to your question, was a new tribe. Right. And so if you're in a career, your network tends to be very oriented around that industry or around that sector. Right. And those might be good people who have your best interests in mind, but they're in that industry, or they think of you in this one way. And so if you're looking to make a change, it's not that you need to zero out all your old friends, of course not. Right. But you need to make new friends and new connections in new areas. Otherwise, the old network can really inhibit you in being able to make and the new people can really help dramatically, with the success trajectory. And then the other one is, she points out that people are not action oriented enough. They tend to try to think it through and solve it in their heads. And so going back into solving it, we talked in Life Entrepreneurs, another theme was what we called healthy support systems as being critical to any kind of entrepreneurship, including life entrepreneurship. Right. And what we mean by that is relationships of trust, diversity, and reciprocity. Right. So trust, you have to have this mutual trust where you have each other's best interests in mind, right? And then you can really go there and be open and vulnerable. And if you're not going to make real progress, because you're not going to get to the core of the core of the core. Right. And that's hard for a lot of people. It's hard for a lot of achievers. It's hard for a lot of men, et cetera. And there's imposter syndrome, et cetera. The second one is diversity. Often our networks are way too homogenous. Right. And then we're missing this beautiful benefit of being challenged by, so for me, I got out of my American bubble and I lived in Europe for 10 years. And it's like, oh my God, you think that, and I lived in London for a year separate. You think that it'd be, pretty similar. And it's not. I mean, it's a huge world, and just the way, like even things that you can't translate, right? Just phrases, ways of thinking about the world and work. Oh my God, it's just vastly different. There's just literally an ocean between them. And it's a great metaphor too, right? And so, but there's beauty there because it challenges me to say, what am I going to keep from what that diverse person is bringing to me, and or from what I'm doing, and what am I going to not keep, because there's different ways to go about it. Maybe there's better ways. And then the third one is reciprocity. You've got to give and take, right? It's got to be reciprocal, so that we feel like and we are there for each other over time. Some people more at this point, and then it bounces the other way. And so just being intentional about that. It's another kind of theme underneath all the other themes and practices, is kind of an intentionality, being more thoughtful about crafting our life and work with intention, with a larger aim. And again, it's open to surprises. Like one of the ways, so we interviewed Randy Komisar as part of that book.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him.
He's a venture capitalist and entrepreneur and author, and really interesting guy. And so he was a virtual CEO for a while, where he was the CEO for a number of the companies on the West Coast. And the way he described it, I thought, was very powerful. He said, with your vision of the good life, it's not a point on the horizon that you're necessarily definitely going to get to that point. And again, here's my 12-step plan. But it's like, this horizon is the one that calls to me. And then within that horizon, I've got that flexibility to adapt to the world, because the world is always changing, and I'm changing and you're changing. But it's not that horizon over there, and it's not the one over here. So it's that horizon is the one that kind of is right for me. But then you have to be open to this kind of emergent approach, where you adapt and you persist and you're flexible about the means and whatnot. But you come back to your purpose and your values and the other things as kind of that safe harbor.
And I think for anybody doing anything of significance in their life around purpose, there's going to be those moments of life is going to have challenges or opportunities that I think expand you more than you would have, right? If it was just a linear thing, it'd be kind of boring, but there'd be very little growth in it. If it's super predictable, at some point it's boring, right? I mean, it just is. So I think, I don't know, as I've looked at the last 3 years of my life, and further back, but definitely the last 3 years, I was describing I have a peer group that I meet with monthly, and I said, and I've been getting more and more into scripture and reading the Bible and studying the Bible more than I ever have. And I was like, it feels like I'm being pruned. I said, it doesn't feel real good, but when I read some of the scriptures, it talks about, God's pruning, prunes those who he's preparing for, their purpose. And I said, but when you get pruned, it's kind of like if you had no arms and no legs and you're laying on the floor thinking, okay, I've been pruned, but how do I get up off the floor? Right. How do I feed myself? How do I get around in the room? I said, so it's kind of this interesting thing where I think, you have to let go of some of these ideals and ideas and maybe fantasies or whatever that you have about who you are, to actually step into who you are. And only life and I think a higher power give you that perspective. I mean, I think some of the and I'm, just visiting here, but some of the greatest experiences I've had from an emotional standpoint, from maybe even physically, I would have never guessed that I would have experienced it. It wouldn't have been a thing where I was like, okay, I want to experience what it's like to be close to God. And then had some analytical, no, it was like, it hit me out of the blue. And all of a sudden I'm having, an experience. I'm going, this is amazing, right? This is what life's about. But then it's a process.
I love what you just said and the way you said it, because I think one of the things that we do is that we try to force it and force our own will and our own approach. And this will, especially for leaders out there, managers, entrepreneurs, there's this notion of kind of willfulness. And as you were talking, I'm just thinking about the wisdom of kind of letting go and being open to something larger that we're a part of, but we don't understand. I too on a spiritual journey right now. And this notion of kind of paying attention to what's emerging and what it might mean. One of the great authors that I love in this space, Matt, is Parker Palmer. He's a former educator turned author, and he had years and years of debilitating depression.
Mm-hmm.
And he went through that experience. And one of his books, it's just this little book, it's just a gem. It's called Let Your Life Speak. And it goes back to the kind of Quaker tradition of voice and vocation and inner voice. And instead of me trying to tell my life what I'm going to do with it and what I need, sometimes I just need to get quiet. There's a beautiful section of the book where he talks about the soul is like a wild animal. And if you want to see the wild animal, you don't go trudging into the forest and stomping on branches and everything. You go deep into the woods and you sit and you get quiet against a tree and you wait there for hours. And it's almost like you've forgotten about that you were looking for anything. And all of a sudden you look over and there's an incredible, buck elk or something over there, or, and it's this notion of listen to your life and let your life speak, and let God or spirit, however you conceive of it, speak into you as well. Now, obviously you can't be passive and you can't just wait for things to happen. It's this dance, right? You've got to engage with it. But I think often we're kind of, sometimes we're pushing it away because we're too willful about things and we're not wise enough to reflect and see some of the patterns.
Yes, I totally agree with you. So where do people go to take your test? Tests.
Well, I've got a few different tests, but the main website is a great place to start. So it's greggvanourek.com. So it's GreggVanourek.com. And you just go there, you'll see right on the top right, there's a TRAPS test. And then I've got the personal values exercise. We've also developed a leadership derailers assessment and other things like that hopefully will be helpful to people. Because again, I've done a lot of work with leaders and entrepreneurs, and my experience is that we're all struggling with traps and derailers. It's just, I mean, sometimes people like all 60, that's right, kind of my life right now. It's just, and that's okay, but which ones are we going to deal with right now? So.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks for the conversation. I really appreciate you coming on today. And certainly as, if you want to share thoughts about, the new book that's coming out, when is the new book coming out? Do you know?
Coming out around mid-year next year,
23. Okay, perfect. So yeah, as that rolls out, get a hold of us, let us know, and we'd love to highlight the book and have you kind of walk us through the book. As it's coming out, it'll be fresh, and we'd love to be one of the first ones to kind of highlight it on our show for our community. And I love our conversation today and appreciate the authenticity of the conversation. And I hope that I know for me, it always is nice to hear the reassurance that it's okay to not know, and then also know that you need to still move forward, right? It's to your point, it's the contemplation and the motion or the action that needs to be taken, right? It's a dance. It's not a sprint.
Right. We're all in it. So let's be in it together. But thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed our conversation too.
Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you back on, hopefully in the spring or summer.
Sounds great. I'll see you then.
Thanks, Gregg. Thank you for being a part of the BriteVibe podcast. For more information, go to BriteVibe.com. That's BRITE Vibe, VIBE.com. Thank you for listening.